Hello. So first of all, thank all of you for being here. And so my I will start tell you a little bit about my background. And so as I started university with classical art education. Then I moved to game design and development, but it was still early days. So I mean, most of my education was in art. So game school wasn't still a thing, at least in Italy, where I come from. Now it's things a little bit different. Be jealous because people can just study Unity at university and it feels so cool. But yeah. About my background, so it's very diverse since I started working on serious games, which are very popular in Italy again because we work closely collaborate with university and stuff like that, and serious games, simulations, training titles are very popular, and I accrue some nice experience from that. And also then I moved to indie development within a studio, and in the last 3 years I moved fully to international production with Magic Media, which is an outsourcing group where I work with many different stakeholders, many different backgrounds, platforms. So I work for PC, console, mobile. You can see some of my highlights here. I think not all of them are retro, but they have some good elements that can be definitely come from a different era of making games. Especially, Grim Horde was a survivors-like game, so definitely a new kind of title, but with a old sensibility. And even Auto Battler, I think they share a lot with games that we, at least my generation, grew up like Final Fantasy, stuff like that. And also, I spend my time, what remains of my time, as a indie dev, indie developer. I'm now working on Edelweiss Nights, which is also in the showcase, and it's a tactic roguelite, and it's mostly for me a study experience since it gives me the occasion to try and experiment with a lot of stuff without being constrained by studio necessities. I just can creativity go wild without any particular expectation in return, but to learn and have fun. And I think that's a great occasion. So I would start with defining what I mean with lo-fi aesthetics. I mean, of course, indie dev has sort of been connected to uh, lo-fi aesthetics, to pixel art, low poly 3D, and of course, it became a staple pretty soon. But I think that there is still a lot of space to exploration in the sense, and also a lot of space to interrogate ourselves on what's the meaning behind the pixels, behind the 3D low poly. I think that now it's a good time to invest in this kind of games to as a creative. I mean, and since there are a lot of people who grew up with these titles, but also a lot of people who never were in this first place to witness this title. So you can see a lot of people who are in love with this pixel art Super Nintendo aesthetics, and weren't even born. And that's I think that's amazing. It reminds me that I was a kid myself and seeing stuff like VHS or vinyls and floppy disk. It was always a discovery for me. It was it's like finding a relics from an ancient past. I feel a lot of people are into that also, and new trends emerge any day. But it's like Fruitiger Hero, of course. Vaporwave is less relevant, maybe, but I think a lot of people still love that stuff. And so it's not just about vibing. I think it's also about creating something that resonates with an audience. And since my work as a game designer in a professional capacity is to understand the core of a product and sell it to people, I think it's very important to not just say, okay, I make something with fancy graphics. I would need to say why I'm making this, how this vision is empowered by this type of graphics. So I tend to, it is my job to reflect a lot on things, to come up with proposal for client, especially because I work in outsourcing company. So it means that a lot of stuff that I do, the success boils down to how much the client is convinced. So I have very big restraints when it comes to my indie development endeavors. On the contrary, I can do whatever I want. I just can just again I can just have fun. So, but I try to create a connection between my indie dev work and my professional work, because I think a lot of takeaways can derive from my personal research. So I would stress further that retro is not a gimmick, and it used to be probably, but now it had become a language in itself. In now we are, it's just like in movies. If you make a black and movie today, it's black and white movie today. It evokes a specific aesthetics, feelings. So it's not just, oh, it's an old movie. You're going to say it's a classic movie. Just like we say it's a classic game. We don't really say old games. We tend to say classic, stylish, retro. Words are very important in my job, so I intend to reflect a lot on definitions. And I also think that retro aesthetics is something that we give it for granted, especially if you grew up with this kind of aesthetics. And I always make an examples, even with my colleague, narrative designer in particular, about how older Final Fantasy games were very the themes, especially in the Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6, especially the 6, were very mature themes. We talk about tragedy, loss, love. There was a lot of very dark moments, and even though the characters were very mm, pretty, the pixel sprites are very pretty, cutesy, but no one perceived them as cutesy. Even if you watch a Final Fantasy 11, uh, sorry, 7, you get that the story is very dramatic. There are many gory moments, and the characters just look like Lego characters, and you just never question that. Also, this nice juxtaposition of different styles of graphics, because in older Final Fantasy you got the character, a full a regular proportional character for the combats, and a chibi model for the environment, for the travels inside the environment. I found that very sweet. Some mobile games still do that nowadays, like Nike. So I think it's a great approach. And I see, so everything was invented back in the day is not lost. We can reuse it with a different perspective. So that's what I mean when I say that retro aesthetics is not just a vibe, is a semiotic system. So it means it's a set of symbols that we can reuse to convey a set of emotions, and that can be mediated by the players in many different ways. And also think it's very interesting to use this emotional toolset to set expectation or subvert them. And there are many works, not just in games, that do this all of the time. I'm a very big anime enthusiast, and I think that many anime use very cutesy art style. I can think of Madoka Magica, even Evangelion to a certain extent. You feel that it's going to be your typical, stereotypical school rom-com, but then you get something dark, and that's a nice way to subvert expectation. I think pixel art, low poly, cutesy graphics can do the same. Um, okay, I also think that the idea is that I think we lost something with higher definition games, because when you look at something like The Last of Us, I mean, it is a great game, of course, and but the photorealism, almost for the photorealism, I mean, is very still a huge degree of abstraction from reality, but still the idea that is so close to reality um, takes away some from your imagination. Since when you play games like Final Fantasy again, or even older games like even text adventures. I mean, never played a text adventure, honestly, but I saw some videos on YouTube, and it's crazy to think that at some point it was a thing to just play with text, just text, nothing else. It wasn't even a visual novel. And I think that those kind of games allowed you to fill in the blanks. So when something like The Last of Us or any other AAA game for that matter gives you everything, gives on from the get go. At the first glance, you there is no space for imagination. While games like Final Fantasy, but even more advanced game, I can think of Super Mario, give you a lot to imagine. It's like when you're reading a book and it's just only text, and you start creating the characters in your mind. The difference with pixel art is that pixel art gives you a lot of information, but it's in a, what can I say, in a pocket size fashion, so you can imagine what is this character, how does it look, and you can also see how that games in the past again mixed and matched different styles. And maybe you remember that classic moment when you bought a game, there are Nintendo 64 games, and the artwork looked in a way, and maybe it was really complex, and then the character was much different. It was, I mean, it was the 90s version of Steam capsules of something that looks really good when you buy something else, and it just look in an entirely different way. A little bit misleading, but he had a charm to that. It was charming to find this very beautiful illustration. I remember even Pokemon had these beautiful drawings that have nothing to do with of course the Game Boy art style, but still it created a mental space. I mean, like a palace of memories that you could just, you stop seeing Pokemon characters as pixel art clusters. You start to see them as real creatures. And in the case of Pokemon, there was also a huge ecosystem of the cartoons, the manga. So it was supporting a lot the simple graphics. And again, I think that yeah, we can use this, all of these lessons to create from older games, to create contrast, visual contrast, and even narrative contrast. Um, I think that's of course you need to do this in a responsible way, because I feel as a senior game designer that it's very easy to fall in the trap of making that really kind of cheesy subversion. Like, and I see a lot of popular titles on itch.io. They the classic something cutesy, but it's actually horror. And I don't. I think yeah, whatever floats your boat. But I think that while it's a good way to scare people, to improve the retention of your gains, to create visibility, I think that gains had the potential to do much more than just take something nice, turn it into horror, make it lo-fi, make it VHS. I think it's important to reflect a lot on the meaning of pixel art, of lo-fi art style, of the past. Also, I think it's important to read a lot about the past, what people in the past thought about your art style. because you will be amazed to discover something that you maybe you were not expecting, because as we live in a different era, so it is easy to misinterpret something. Maybe you say, okay, I'm playing this very old game, I don't know, Chrono Trigger from Super Nintendo, and something is difficult to grasp how it resonated with people when it first came out. And I try to, and it is nice to evoke that same feeling, or maybe you want to evoke your own feeling. And but I think that sometimes the idea of pixel art gets a little bit lost in translation, and you say, okay, it's just pixel art, it's cute or whatever. But on the other hand, if you look at original resources, devlogs, magazines, it's difficult to find this stuff, because most of the stuff is in books, is an old magazine, is in Japanese magazine. So you do a lot. You need to do your own resources, but you understand that many of the choices that were made at that time were motivated by very different notions, but that one that we interpret today. And I think a good example of this, although this is just visual, not psychological, it's um, how the sprites, you get this eureka moment when you discover that the sprites are not drawn in a certain way just because. But they are drawn like this because they needed to be reproduced on CRT monitors. And so, in some way, the reticle on the CRT monitors filled in some of the gaps in the pixel art. And so, if you play a pixel art game on a CRT monitor, it looks much better, of course, than play it on a LCD or on a laptop. You can also use a filter, of course, but it's an example of how a lot of stuff tends to go into lost into translation, and you need to do your own research to be authentic. And by authentic, I not mean just be one recreation of the past, but I rather refer to understand what really the past was about, and then start to recreate it in your own version. Yeah. Now I will do talk about something a little bit more pragmatic. Of course, feel free to make questions, because I know some of the concepts are really connected to creative direction. And creative direction can become very philosophical. So, and also in my company, there are a lot of talkings, but you don't just jump in the engine and create stuff. It's all about reflection, collecting reference, gathering benchmarks. So I tend to, as they say, to prepare my eggs a lot before going into chopping. And I would say anyway that there is a practical aspect to all these pixel art and lo-fi art style craze, because of course you need to make virtue out of necessity, since you just you studios started using pixel art, of course, because it's much easier than just assemble a 3D AAA style art style. But even though pixel art can be incredibly difficult, and you can really end up in a route, especially if you have a lot of assets, it can be very tricky. It is falsely simple, but still it's much is simple when making a full blown 3D game with animation. You can masquerade a lot of stuff between the limits. So of course a lot of indie devs go for that. And but since a lot of indie devs do this, that's one more added reason to reason about this choice of pixel art, because you are in competition, and I think that it's just like when you are on Twitter, X, and you scroll in the the dev hashtag, and you see this lieu of pixel art games, because pixel art feels so good. It's you would like to. Sometimes I want to eat pixel art. It's just so nice, but you're fighting with a huge competition. People that are collecting clout just by posting one um, animated GIF of a pixel art game, and it gets like 1K likes. I mean, it's great, but it means that if you need to be at the top of your game and to do that stuff, and it means that if you're not in the top, your game is probably gonna be ignored. And so it's very important to nail down pixel art, because it's not more a quirky style. It's as established as a style as 3D, as everything else. So huge competition, definitely. And it is so easy for people to love pixel art, especially Game Boy is so popular, and it's something people instantly recognize. So everyone is going for that gold mine. And I think that the games that as a designer I think are more viable for market success are the ones that reinterpret these art styles and these graphical constraints in a meaningful way, but they give some meaning to using Game Boy graphics, SNES, or whatever. Yeah, but anyway, I think that from the production pipeline standpoint, they're very readable. Pixel is so readable, especially if you go for the easier art style. So one beat, two colors. I mean, it's a low hanging fruit sometimes. You can slap something in a sprite, and with not so much work, it already looks decent, and that's a major advantage compared to other art styles. And also, I think that's the reason why it is very important to set boundaries for the art pipeline, because because pixel art works, but when everything is coherent. So on a hierarchical pyramid, I say that we start for the meaning. Why are you using this art style, this pixel art style? Then on a second level, we say why this art style applies to your game specifically, how it empowers your game mechanics, and then you start reasoning how it empowers um, with your consistency. What is your rule set? How this you can reuse this all over the game to create a common visual language for the player, but ultimately empowers the design. It's very easy to get lost when. And also, I think I have this attitude of seeing the big picture. Even though I work in a studio, I try to understand that everything that I design ripples with all of the other departments. And in my solo dev experience, this happens anytime, because of course it's just me. So I see that I can easily shoot myself in the foot if I decide on an art style out on a whim, just because I say, okay, it looks nice. And then I discover that it has nothing to do with my game. Maybe I say, okay, I like Super Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga, amazing, cool, great outlines, very crispy, I love it. But then maybe I'm making a game where that's outline, but very big chunky sprites doesn't really work. So it's important to remember the pyramid start with what we call the core experience statement, what your game need to represent. I think, yeah, but as I said before, it's about finding your own style. So it's not simply stylization. By stylization, I say, okay, I have an idea and I create an art style, an asset in that using that art, that vibe, but simple stylization. But I'd rather talk about distillation, and this is a term that comes from wine brewing or by alchemy. So it's about creating your own blend of the pixel art style on 3D poly and whatnot. It's about using your core experience statement, your design dogmas, so to say, to understand what really works best for your game. So mix, match, blend, and be careful, because in this blend, it doesn't mean that you need to be 100% philological in regard to the pixel art eras. I think that a lot of people just don't care, right? And this is right. At least in my opinion. I mean, if you're going for the Game Boy aesthetics, okay, but of course, Game Boy was very limited. So, and you are using much more powerful tools today. So, I think it's entirely okay to just say, okay, this sprite can be a little bit bigger. This type of animation could never be put up on a Game Boy, but we can, so let's do it. I'm totally okay with that, but still only if it's in tune with the concept of the game. Because maybe the game say, my game is about nostalgia, it's about the impossibility of recreating something today, uh, about the idea that what we lost is never coming back. And so in that case, maybe I want to make a very specific art style and say this is a very faithful recreation. In other cases, I think that taking liberties is, yeah, it's important. It's I mean, otherwise it's another way to it becomes a very sluggish process. And as a creative, I think that you want to have good constraint, not bureaucracy. So not just saying, okay, I won't put that pixel here because Super Nintendo title never did that. I think that's too much, honestly. But I mean, to each his own. And I think that, of course, working with small pixel art, you need to understand that the symbols, the silhouette, the shapes are everything. And if you watch a Final Fantasy characters again, or Dragon Quest for that matter, they are very simple, but they had this many many details on there, and the Final Fantasy developers were able to cram all of these details on such a little sprite. And so I think that whenever you start working on this Pixar game, you should make a huge mood board with all of this style and obsess over the sprites made by Squaresoft developers, since every pixel that they put is intentional, is deliberate, and you can see that they can create eyes, armor details with just one stroke of pixel. So it's important to reverse engineer these art styles. And also you understand that the when you start looking at the stuff, you understand that there is a very deep connection between form and function. So it's not just let's make a pretty character, let's make a pretty warrior. No, it's mostly about making something that stands out in a very limited visual environment. And so it's indeed a struggle, because they had these limits very much in mind, while the tools that we use today are very complex. So we don't have the limitation very clear in my mind, and that makes for less interesting art, in my opinion. And so it's very important to take references and in a clever way to see how much of these sprites use limitations in their favor. And you can also see much better also in animation. It's you can see that um, there was a lot of intentionality behind that. um, Also, when I talk about visual cues, I refer namely to color, because if you watch this cast from RPG, older JRPG, all of the characters were heavily color coded. It could be, I mean, it's a no-brainer, but it's important to remember. But yeah, but color coding is crucial for pixel art, especially more advanced art style. So you get. I mean, even if you watch something that became iconic, like I don't know, the white mage of Final Fantasy is like the white. It has the white tunic with the red outlines, red shapes. You see, it's a beautiful design, and it's also something that carried over to new incarnation of Final Fantasy. But if you played Final Fantasy One, you understand that was uh, I wouldn't say an obligatory choice, but still you can observe how they made the most out of what they have, because it's a very simple. It's a black mantle with red shapes, and it pops. It just pops. You don't never you never lose track on that on a screen. Same goes for the black mage, which is and also black mage is a perfect idea of using some limitation at your advantage, because you see that the black mage is it doesn't have a face, so to say. Is like a black void with red eyes, and it's such a strong visual solution. It probably comes from the being limited to I mean, less is more. So instead of creating another wizardry character, I just put the face away, just at our black shadow. That's a clever way to create visual distinction, and also creating something memorable, because the black mage from Final Fantasies uh, is so iconic. I mean, they even so iconic that in Final Fantasy IX they made an entire character which is Vivi out of that character archetype. So it really sticks. So the easier the visual cue, the longer the character will be remembered. And this is a little bit more specific to my current game at the moment. But what I'm trying to say is blending 2D and 3D, and in a way that um, makes me feel attuned to the game story. So I won't delve too much into the narrative, honestly, because I prefer to talk as an eye concept. But I mean, I'm making a game with strong Final Fantasy vibes, and I see that and that there is this contrast between dark themes and complex themes. It's a game about religion, about goddess descending on earth. So there's a lot of psychological struggle, Evangelion tire dialogue. So I mean, it's anime a lot, but it has some strong themes, and I feel that this contrasts a lot with colorful graphics. And while I could just stick to pixel 2D, I prefer to have a blend of 3D or low poly 3D with pixel textures and pixel characters. I prefer this because I really love the idea of watching into the game environments, like you were watching as a in a diorama, like it's like or just looking like a hobby model, like a dollhouse. I like this element a lot. I just like it, and I think it gives the idea of a toy-like world. And again, it's I say this comes from research, honestly, because when I started creating art for this game, I watched Final Fantasy Tactics material a lot, and they had explained many times that they wanted to create this diorama effect. And if you by the Final Fantasy Tactics art book. That is they just created a diorama, a little model of the town, and they put a chick inside of it. Just so a real chick, so it's like a chocobo, and it's so cool. And I get where I got this idea from. And so I think that to me it was important because my character has a lot of cozy moments despite the grim premise. There is a lot of connection between the characters, so having this more fuzzy toy-like feeling really made sense. And although I could pull off this in 2D, I think that in 3D feels more real. So there was a reasoning behind this, but I admit that part of my decision was also okay. 2D plus 3D is simple to put up, and also is cute. It just looks nice and is popular, I guess. So of course you need to balance between all of this stuff. So popularity, is easiness of implementation, and also how it connects to everything you've done so far. But given the story that the narrative designer handed to me, I couldn't really imagine a different art style. It just fits very, very well. And also, there is another example of using this to my advantage, since, as I mentioned in my game, there are some entities called the deities, which are similar to the angels in Evangelion. So they come from another dimension. So it just made sense that they were created in 3D because your characters are pixel art, the environment in pixel art, but the 3D beings, they come from another world. So the distinction is obvious. Anyone can say, okay, this guy comes from another dimension, and of course it's an abstraction. It's something that you could just make in games. But in a movie, probably someone would say this guy comes from a fourth dimension, and you get see something very crazy. Or maybe you could go for the interstellar route and just take very complex calculations on the universe and try to recreate that visually. That's very advanced. In the case of my game, the idea of having enemies and God be in 3D just made sense. So that's a way to connect theming and storytelling and actual 3D pipeline. So, as I said in the pro tip, let your tech choices reinforce your story, not just look cool. So, as I said, yeah, I call that game semiotics. I don't consider myself, of course, a game semiotics expert. It's a huge uh, territory in academia, but I suggest for game designer, artists to look into that because it's literally the story of symbols, the meaning of symbols. And a lot of stuff when you read these books, when you inform yourself about semiotics, you start. I think you start becoming a better creator. And maybe I have a skewed perspective because I come from Italy, and for some reason I can understand game studies are very popular in Italy, probably because Italy has a long tradition of universities, of academia. There is a lot of deconstruction, and this somehow is also happening in games. So you see a lot of very interesting scholars that dissect game not from just their mechanics, but from for very symbolic meaning standpoint, from the cultural values standpoint. So it's interesting to dissect these games using the semiotics frameworks. And semiotics, I don't know how much you're into that. I'm very not knowledgeable, but I did some readings. And so I suggest, for example, reading Umberto Eco uh, books, essays. He was a scholar in Italy from the 50s, and I think he decided some years ago, and he wrote a lot of books about semiotics applied to television. And nowadays, people are doing the same with games, and it gives really a different perspective and reasoning. And I think for at least for game designer, this is an interesting perspective. Is it what I call food for thought? So it's difficult that someone will ask to you when you apply for a job or when you do a pitch. But if you have these tool sets in your in your backpack, you have a I think you have a unique advantage. Um, yeah. So I just reiterate that you developers have this toolbox and this so powerful toolbox. And I suggest also to dissect old games. I suggest using tools just like Obsidian, for example, to do a mind mapping. So you play test a lot of old games, and then put all of your notes inside Obsidian and start creating a constellation, a mind map of all your ideas, and everything will become clear. You start creating connection. You will start understanding fully um, your art style and your game design and the connection between the two. I think another interesting bullet point is play with player expectation for past games. And I'm not talking about subverting expectation. I'm talking about leveraging on player expectation. Since, of course, if you play with expectations, I mean, you can piggyback on established conventions. It's just like when you play nowadays 3D game and like a horror game, and you always get that yellow stays, the yellow pipe that you need to look at that to follow the direction. There is a slew of contents from the pixel art era or convention that you can just piggyback on. And I suggest studying that, taking notes, because it, especially nowadays, it's easy to find a lot of resources on 3D level design. But when you look for 2D level design, uh, I feel much. I mean, the principles are the same, but there is a one less dimension. So and it's difficult to. You need to rewire your brain a lot when doing 2D game design. You need there is an entirely different spatial awareness, and but likely the designers before us already solved these issues before many years ago. And the only thing is there are not, I don't think, maybe correct me I'm wrong, maybe just based some nice book but since these games were made a lot of time ago, academia was still a thing, books about games was still a thing. So I'm pretty sure that even games with great design, I don't know, like Donkey Kong, I don't think that outside from Nintendo official sources, you can find good design resources. So it's all about you dissecting these old games and creating this backlog of knowledge for you to use and to understand the grammar of 2D games. Um, yeah, yeah, I think I've already touched this upon, but yeah, I think that vibes, I mean, it's a sort of overused word, and I prefer other types of words. I think that people are in I confounding vibes with what's really animoia. Animoia is the idea of feeling regret and longing for eras where you never lived in. And I absolutely adore this concept. And I think also it connects out to the mono no aware from Japanese culture, the idea that everything is passing. So there is a lot of nostalgia, some can I say some abandoning to the idea that time is passing, and you can recreate that by evoking old art styles. So it goes really deep. That was I mean, if you want to take one takeaway from this speech, is that it goes deep. It's not just fancy graphics. You really need to understand the story, and the more years will pass, the more we tend to lose what really made these uh, pixel art styles so unique and vibrant. We will lose the cultural context. So it's just when you go, for example, again in Italy, into a church and you see these beautiful paintings, and what you see is just a beautiful painting, and say, okay, amazing. I don't know, maybe you see a picture of Christ on the cross, and you say, okay, I remember the biblical reference, great, and probably, especially when you're little kid, and I remember not connecting at all. I say, okay, I don't care about this story that told me a lot of times, and and that's a perfect example of how things got lost into translation, since when you actually study those paintings, they have a lot of meanings. They have political meaning. They have relationships to religion, to esoteric, to the cult. I mean, I think all of many of you have probably seen the Code Da Vinci, and although that is a abstraction, it still has a point. I mean, it's a point that there is some messages from older art against our art too, that it's up to us to decipher. It's not a conspiracy. It's more like we lived in a different context, and we need to go beyond our context to understand their context. And it's interesting because if you read the most famous book by Umberto Eco, or the second most famous book, which is called the Foucault Pendulum, it's all about this. It's like the Code Da Vinci, but made by the intellectual, and it's beautiful because it tells you that how much the symbols that you see nowadays, we take them for granted, and we are unable to grasp them, and so unable to grasp them with you can easily go into madness, just like the protagonist of the book. I hope that doesn't happen to you, of course, while researching for game, but you get my point. Um, yeah, I think, yeah, we covered this. The idea that this is commercially viable. I think it's under, you have Twitter, X, everything. You see that these games just are popular, and I don't think it is gonna end. I think this is just more people are going to find more art styles, more crazy or obscure art style, and it's so funny. And of course, I need to account for LLMs and AI, because that's a thing today. And I think, however, that chasing these retro art styles, if done right, is a good way to counterbalance the rise of AI slop, of course, because you can improvise some pixel art in whatever AI model you're using, but to go that deep into research to recreate that feeling, it requires a different layer. And still, AI can help you into reaching the level of understanding. I use AI more for reasoning and gathering resources than actual creation. But I feel that, yeah, it's a rabbit hole. The more you go into art and these are rabbit holes when making your game, the more your style will be unique. And I think this is a nice segue into the next slide, because I think it's important to honor the medium, and that sounds very, can I say, uh, true tonant words, but I I feel that it's important to respect that we are working in an established art medium, just like movies, just like theater. And so it's not just looking at tutorials on YouTube that were made 2 years ago, but people that don't make games. It's better to look in the past, and since it's very easy to pick up the tech, is nowadays you just start developing stuff in Unity very quickly, Unity, Unreal, whatever. But reasoning is something that you don't you can't buy, you can find on YouTube. You need to do it yourself. And I feel that's why I'm so fixated on the past of games. And I feel that there is a lot of untapped potential in the history of games. And there are, also because when you think of old games, I, for one, tend to think of Game Boy, Mega Drive, uh, PC Engine, maybe because I so many games with anime style. Well, when you ask about, I don't know, television, ZX Spectrum, Commodore, that's a lot earlier. I wasn't even born. So I tend to overlook these games, and it's a pity because some of them are so clever, both in visual solution and both in design solution. So I suggest tapping to that because it's a gold mine, and also try to find as much as possible all dev interviews, design docs, lost techniques. Uh, of Luckily, we have got AI tools, so even translating Japanese books interviews, it's much easier than in the past. For example, I remember having a eureka moment when starting making my game and see discovering that in Final Fantasy Tactics, the Final Fantasy Tactics creator worked previously for Tactics Ogre, and he mentioned that in the first iteration of the saga of Tactics Ogre, he was the same guy doing the concept art and the sprites. And I think that's a wild revelation because it means that I understand why there is so much these characters were so strong because the artist also did the sprites. So it's he probably already thought about the sprites when making the drawings. And of course, it's a common indie dev practice. But to me, that someone did something in SquareSoft, in popular games, I always imagine, okay, there are like 20, 30 people making all of these sprites. And when and the concept art, and when you discover it was just one guy, you appreciate much better the title, and you can save. You can also, yeah, I think it's motivating. It's motivating you a lot, and is also, yeah, a way to a way to understand the workflow. So it's an homage. I think it's definitely an homage to the past. And I use this picture, which is taken on the game museum of Rome, and I think it's a very interesting place. And they are very close friends of mine, and I think that's I'm also sure that there are similar places also in other in Europe. I think there is one in France, was one in Germany, and I mean, still a niche thing, but it's so important, especially for a designer. I mean, I can just I obsess over this stuff. I mean, all of these things that I see here evoke to me something. I put Game Boy because, of course, but it's interesting because you can see even very older stuff, and even obscure stuff, like Pong version made only for the Italian market, well, probably bootlegs. But and you see that even broken stuff from Vix that really didn't land, there was some reasoning behind that, and you can learn a lot even from broken things of the past. So that's why I'm so fixated about this concepts, because there is something always new to learn from the old. uh so yeah, this is my final thoughts and takeaways, and then we can leave some space for questions. I feel that, yeah, we can sum it up: these deep feelings and small things. You can go great lengths by using uh, lo-fi art styles with some meaning in mind. You can also remember. You need also to remember that it's about the conjunction between design, vibes, aesthetics, and tech. It's a triangle. So you need to be able to serve all of these aspects. And pixel art is a very elegant way to tie all of the all, all the notes and make something that is visually and emotionally powerful. So I think we're done, and if we have time for questions, I'm happy to respond about some your doubts concerning indie development, creative direction, aesthetics, technical workflows, retro game aesthetics. And so I'm working in outsourcing studio. So maybe if you're interested about that side.
Thank you very much for your lecture. Unfortunately, we don't really have time left for questions, but maybe the viewers can contact you using these links. Is that right?
Yeah, feel free to do it, especially LinkedIn. It's open anytime. Feel free to drop in a message, and yeah, also happy to connect with you.
Right. Thank you very much. Hope to see you again. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye bye.